One day, as much as 100 years ago, the terrifying forces of Kai resurrected. Kai threatened the entire kingdom of people, when a ferocious and bloodthirsty evil spirits rebelled after coming to this world. Gorillas with toothy eyes on their bellies, mutating pterodactyls, and many more unimaginable creatures appeared in the ominous fog. Each of these monsters, without exception, was configured and programmed for the complete extermination of the human race in order to dominate the human kingdom. It was completely unexpected that there were people in the human kingdom who were able to resist this hassle. To everyone's happiness, people appeared among the world in whom an extraordinary power awakened, which made them much stronger, more resilient, more talented, and gave them the ability to kill evil spirits from another world in the kingdom. The first of the awakened fought hard against the evil that came into their world. Subsequently, they founded 4 powerful outposts to protect their kingdom of people from the hassle and crowds of monsters. Yu Sheng was a boy who grew up in a criminal city from childhood, under the name of Moj. There, on the streets at any time of the day, one could witness murder, theft, and even more successful situations. Yu Sheng himself participated in them. He needed to adapt to the conditions of his life, which he could not change. He had an extraordinary talent for managing cold weapons. He always held an ordinary katana in his hand and fought with it too. He was able to take the sphere of the 9 patterns into himself. His behavior was also considered unusual. He easily figured out how to contact the police, but not to convict himself of a crime. For example, one day he called the police to inform on his father, a buyer of sex services who was going to commit a sexual crime. He even gave an exact description of the conditions. 8 o'clock in the evening, Sophie's hotel, room number 302. Yu Sheng was truly brilliant, just because it was a pure bluff to distract attention. Everything worked exactly as it should and the criminal was discouraged, unable to react in time to the rapid movement. A strong blow on the arm with a katana, but not deep so as not to chop off the hand at all. There was a scratch on the man's arm, there was a lot of blood and he screamed in pain, and Yu Sheng stepped aside clutching a thin blade in his hand. He always easily attracted attention to himself when it was convenient for him. The man in the coat who was going to evaluate Yu Sheng's skills said so. People watching the cameras smeared their fingers on the screen at the break, claiming that this guy was definitely some kind of amazing. It should have interested everyone. A handsome young man in old, worn clothes, with a katana in his hand and a cold look, who grew up in the criminal city of Moj was the hope in the struggle of people. Everyone didn't know who Yu Sheng would grow up to be. There was a light on in Yu Sheng's house at night. The house was warm and bright. The atmosphere was cozy and smelled like a simple dinner around. Sheng was terribly busy rereading and studying the Moj legislation. His nose itched because of the astringent perfume that his real father poured over him standing in front of the mirror. Yu Sang Shui was preening at the dressing table, combing his hair, adjusting his styling, muttering something about men who are comparable to wine at 40. Everything was as usual. He left food for his son in the refrigerator, notified about it and, ignoring the complete detachment, left. This time, among the toilet water and cigarettes, there was a sticker where it was written, Sophie's Hotel, room 302. Yu San Shui swaggered out into the corridor and turned around and reminded his son not to stay up late, to remember about his exam tomorrow. Yu San Shui himself was going on a date, hoping that it would go well and the exam would be well passed. Along with the slam of the front door, the legislation of Moj also slammed. A phone with the police number already dialed appeared in his hands. Shen repeated everything exactly as planned. Tonight at Sophie's Hotel, at 8 o'clock, there will be a completely sexual crime. Yu Sheng is completely sure of the correctness of the room number 302, and he is sure of the criminal because he is his father. Yu Sheng did not worry much about denouncing his own father. He believed that he was doing society and the people a favor, helping in a sense. In peace and solitude, he sat down at the table to have dinner with cold rice and vegetables. The awakening ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow. This event was very important for Shen. He himself did not know where the thought came from in his head that he would be able to open the patterned egg. This thought was also haunting, as if it was a scroll of the dead. It was unknown whether something would change after his awakening, but I wanted to hope that it would. Half an hour later, when the plates were empty in the sink and the Moj legislation was open again, Shen's phone vibrated. He thought that the policeman had dialed him by accident, but he answered the call. From the phone came the countenance and the plaintive cry of his father Yu Sang Shun. He shouted that he did not know how this bastard found out about everything, and that he had given his son in exchange for a report, but he urgently needed to go to the police station and pay bail for his father. Yu Sheng didn't have any money, but he had a plan. The father muttered that there was a key under the bed in Sang Shun's bedroom, which could open the back door of the neighboring house, where widow Wang lives. The money in the stash lies right under the vat with the blanks. In the named hiding place, Shen found $2,000. The amount was relatively not bad. Shen had enough of it. The money was lying in the grass under the usual clay root, where the necessary blanks were put. Widow Wang's yard was empty and quiet. Obviously his mistress was sleeping soundly then. The mobile was twitching in his pocket again. The police called, asking if Shen would pay bail for his father. Yu calmly replied that he wasn't going to do that. Violation of the law should, according to the rules, be punished with a punishment that will be equal to or greater in strength of the crime itself. Yu Sheng's father needed to be properly rehabilitated in prison. He advised the police to make this man a useful member of society. All this has always been the positive side of the city of Moj. All people living there are obliged to respect and observe, honor and protect these foundations. In cold blood, but planned, Yu Sheng got rid of the interfering father, did not get a lot of money. He didn't feel guilty about it. Everything was right and legal by his standards. It was not clear whether it was a dream or a memory of Yu Sheng. He was running through the back streets of his city, tightly holding the hand of some girl in similar worn clothes. I had to practically drag her behind me. Yu Sheng ran much faster. Sometimes I had to adjust to her running. The girl had developed stamina, had a good command of the weapon and could defend herself in a fight if necessary. Of course, Yu Sheng surpassed her skill, but she did not cower and continued to run in order not to let the pursuers catch up with them in any case. Behind the two of them was a crowd of people who looked more like rabid dogs. No one else could have come up with another comparison to these thugs and scumbags. Screams and arrows flew at the fugitives' backs. The archers there were not experienced, but they were definitely very accurate. One of the attacks could end with the loss of an eye. The arrow whistled straight into Yu Sheng's eyeball. He managed to avoid injury with an amazing turn and moved to the side. The arrow hit the stone road, remaining there along with many others. The pursuers were not going to let their victims go just like that. Their leader was constantly shouting for them to run faster. They could not miss them. Continuing to rush headlong, Yu Sheng and the girl did not notice how they ran to a dead end. A high concrete wall with barbed wire on top did not allow anyone to leave the hated city of Moj. The others caught up with them immediately. The gap was large, but the bandits also developed speed well. One of the general crowd was shouting mockingly, forcing the two freaks to run again and again. Obviously, the leader of the gang was standing in front of everyone with a bat, which was studded with nails and lay on his shoulder for a preponderance. The appearance of this guy was also not pleasant, like a nail. The purple-dyed mohawk tamed an empty head. The body was pumped up with long criminal activity and experience. A red tank top hung on the trunk, and a gold chain on the chest seemed to boast of bright color and coolness. The leader also wanted to make fun and make fun. He was asking with burning eyes if these stupid freaks were going to get out of their city of Zui. Finally, he added that it was a squalid dream and half-empty guffawed in response as if by timing. No one wanted to stand like this any longer and saw no point. Yu Sheng was already holding his weapon in his hands. The girl next to him was also ready for the upcoming fight. The gang leader casually threw the bat forward, ordering the others to kill the fugitive immediately. 5 people ran out in their direction at once. Yu Sheng moved quickly, maneuvering between punches and swings of his hands. He overtook the opponents faster than they did him and killed each one in turn. Less than a minute later, Shen was already squeezing the blade into the chest of the gang leader. There were 6 lifeless bodies lying in the alley by the dead end. Shen waved his weapon to clear it and looked around. The girl who ran with him was cold, said that now he can leave without any problems. In Yu Sheng's hands there was a purple card. The word passage was written on paper among the patterns, and immediately the walls parted, shedding a lot of light. Without hesitation, Yu Sheng stepped into the bright space alone and immediately woke up, jumping up on his bed. The bright building was crowded. Girls and boys were walking in groups, discussing last night and the events of the awakening ceremony itself. Someone did not close their eyes all night, not once, from excitement. Others did not know at all whether they would be able to wake up and open the patterned egg. Yu Sheng walked calmly in the midst of people almost without listening to their conversations. No one spoke to him, and Yu Sheng himself did not want to talk to anyone. Everyone came to the preparatory class and sat down in the vacant seats. Especially important ones tried to take the desks in front in order to draw attention to themselves. Yu Sheng sat down on the penultimate desk and looked out of the window with detachment. Even if he diligently showed his interest, it would not help the situation. Besides everything else, so many people knew about him. A tall man was standing at the teacher's chair. Liu Qingfeng was the homeroom teacher of this group of teenagers. He wore a gray suit uniform with a small emblem, tied his hair in a tight ponytail, and made it clear with his whole appearance what seriousness, success, courage were. Even when he began to speak his prepared speech as a parting word to the students, Yu Sheng continued to look out the window. Exactly 1 hour later, the awakening exam will officially begin. It was hard not to understand and notice that almost everyone hopes to wake up on their own and pull out the best talent. Even the homeroom teacher Liu Qingfeng himself admitted that it was possible, judging by the determination and lights in the eyes of the students. The man's speech was rapidly gaining momentum with seriousness and enthusiasm. He even clenched his fist with all his might. He wanted the students to start preparing and tempering themselves right here and now, and then kill all the evil spirits, conquer this city and win, receive universal respect, recognition, glory and laurels. It was necessary to drown the enemies in their own blood, help and contribute to the prosperity of people, literally make them respect everyone who performed an amazing feat to save them. The class teacher Liu Qingfeng believed that if a person is left behind in this exam, while serving the people, then his attempt automatically becomes meaningless. At the last words, he put his fist to the collar of his jacket. Clutching the emblem, he examined the students. Everyone in turn raised their hands, jumped up from their seats and shouted, "Help the prosperity of people. To serve the people. Kill evil spirits." The homeroom teacher's speech really inspired many, made them brave and confident in their abilities. Only Yu Sheng continued to look out of the window without raising either himself or his hands. Yu Sheng only melancholically noticed that serving the people or the people who serve are different concepts. With his words, he made everyone quiet down, turn around in his direction and wait for further words. The class teacher was upset. Angry, he lowered his fist, saying that this guy was just a bastard. The time was coming to an end. The homeroom teacher brought the watch to his face to examine the dial more accurately. The time has come and the class teacher has notified all the students that they need to go to the awakening zone, where the exam will take place. He followed each student with his eyes, stopped at Yu Sheng, thought that he could not imagine how many patterns such a scumbag like this could have. He wanted to hope that they didn't exist at all. Right in the middle of the school lawn, several metal arches were placed, to which a different queue of students lined up. Everyone was patiently waiting for them to be allowed to pass through it and touch the blue egg. There were people checking and recording indicators at each of them. It was announced loudly and clearly, in the 6th grade, Liu Yuxuan has 4 patterned eggs. The guy with red shaggy hair almost jumped for joy. Such a result as he had was quite worthy and cool. The man standing next to him smiled at this display of enthusiasm, said that this was not a bad talent. Besides, if the power system suddenly hatched, then Liu Yuxuan would have a huge chance to enter the police departments, and then he had nothing to worry about anymore. In history, it was mentioned and said that since the resurrection of Kai, all animals have become larger in size and much stronger. At that time, extraordinary powers also awoke in people. Every time during the awakening, an egg appears behind the person. And according to the rules, only the person who will have all the patterns awakened can and will become the greatest of all. A frowning homeroom teacher stood at one of the metal structures. Liu Qingfeng measured the queue with a calm look and asked Yu Sheng to come over. The guy stood in front of the metal detector with his hands in his pockets. He did not look at the class teacher, so it was clear that the man was not enthusiastic about it. Yu Sheng behaved aloof and calm. One would think that he did not really need this exam and the awakening itself. When asked if he had metal objects, Yu Sheng answered in the usual manner. The question seemed strange to him. He lives in Moga, and in a criminal city where criminal chaos reigns on the streets. Of course he carries a couple of knives for self-defense. And what else can you expect? The homeroom teacher stretched out a demanding hand, urging Yu Sheng to take everything out and put it on the storage rack. The equipment for awakening is very expensive. Any metal interference can interfere and spoil the final result of checking the number of patterns on the egg. Yu Sheng was not going to object or start arguments and quarrels because of this. However, one should not forget that life, but rather the terrible and difficult need for survival in his area, taught him to think ahead. With each new clang of blades on the box, more surprised sighs appeared around. A dagger appeared from his belt, a penknife from the sleeves of his jacket, several throwing knives from under the lining of his sports jacket. The face of the class teacher twisted into contempt. The rest of the students wondered who a person should be to hide and carry so many cold weapons with him. After that, shurikens, needles, metal stakes and blades in a bundle fell on the table. The homeroom teacher Liu Qingfeng asked again if the student had pulled everything out, and when he nodded his head let him pass to the metal detector. The arch was recorded and lit up with a red light as soon as Yu Sheng entered it halfway. From shock, The teacher even asked the examiner if the student had another medal with him. Yu Sheng rubbed his chin with his fingers and stepped back. He assumed that only his iron will remained. The homeroom teacher could have punched him, exploded with anger or something, but he just yelled at Yu Sheng to stop joking and give everything he had. I had to shake out my jacket. In any case, it was easier to get everything that was there right away. Yu Sheng raised his hand in a conciliatory gesture, assuring that there was definitely nothing else now. He noted to himself that he did not even have trump cards now. The metal arch finally lit up blue and stopped screaming with its sensors. Yu Sheng was allowed to go ahead and told to put his hand on a bluish large egg that stood on a pedestal for all the students. The sphere shimmered blue, spun and glittered when Yu Sheng touched the surface with his palm. The crowd roared with gasps again. A red egg with 9 patterns hung in the air behind Shen. At first, the teacher checking stuttered repeated the test result. 9 patterns. After him, it was repeated by the frowning Shen himself. 9 patterns. Even the homeroom teacher repeated this amazing result quietly so that no one would hear. No one would have heard him. The students who were still waiting for their turn to be tested and those who had already passed it also stuttered. No one could have imagined. It was unimaginable to imagine that such a dead outcast like Yu Sheng, who did not communicate with anyone at school, and was practically empty in general, would have as many as 9 full-fledged patterns, because they make him very important and majestic, open too many doors and opportunities in front of him. It was necessary to do something. Yu Sheng did not count on majesty and superiority among all people at all. He wasn't going to take the exam. He just couldn't get rid of the obsessive thought that he needed it. He went to this test without counting on anything, and in the end he got the best result. Yu Shengwu didn't like it. He had to come up with something urgently, create a backup plan in his head for such an unexpected situation. He looked at the inspector, said that the equipment was obviously broken. The inspector came closer. The equipment was indeed intact and unharmed, completely working properly. Yu Sheng looked calm and comically poked his fingers into the sphere, but when he heard the words of the inspector, I remained calm. Only instead of a finger, he punched the equipment. The blue sphere shattered into pieces along with the pedestal and the stand. Yu Sheng repeated louder the fact that the equipment was broken. The inspector could not utter a single word. He froze to the side with a pale face and was too scared. Yes, the equipment was really broken, could not work and needed to be repaired. The class teacher Liu Qingfeng appeared next to him as if from the ground, squeezed the hand with which Yu Sheng broke the sphere, and informed him that this was damage to public property, which entails punishment inevitably. The homeroom teacher waved his hand, summoning his pet, a huge blue bird, sat on it and threw Yu Sheng there as well. The student must now proceed with the elder to be punished. It was still bad that Yu Sheng had no trump cards and weapons left, but something else overshadowed the situation. When the bird took off, a strange gray smoke appeared. It came from the whole body of Yu Sheng. The guy was surprised to pick up his scroll of the dead and was amazed that this thing reacted to his awakening with 9 patterns on the egg. During the entire short flight, Yu Sheng didn't say anything. The homeroom teacher personally escorted him to the principal's office, where, without letting go of his shoulder, he listened attentively and respectfully to the old man's words. It was bright in the study. The sun shone on the furniture and wooden walls. The director was an elderly man. The gray hair on his temples and the bald spot on the top of his head spoke vividly about this. He was reading through the documents in the name of Yu Sheng, and a young girl was standing next to him, apparently his secretary or assistant. She was quite beautiful and a figure skater. Her dark hair was hanging behind her back, very long and shiny. White shirt with lace collar and buttons, pencil skirt made of dark fabric. Perhaps she was also a student, maybe the head of some class, who distinguished herself in the life of the school. But most likely this girl held the position of secretary. She was too young for an assistant or right hand. As if the director had read the characterization aloud to himself, Yu Sheng transferred to their school half a year ago, when he was 18 years old. The director doubtfully asked just in case if Yu Sheng really came from the criminal city of Moj, and his direct confirmation made the others frown repeating these words. Yu Sheng himself continued to say nothing superfluous and look at the floor. The director continued to drill him with his gaze. According to the reliable information that he had on hand, if the scroll really opens during awakening. He did not continue further, realizing that the consequences and causes are so well known to everyone, and the student who arrived, knowing them, continues to look detached and disinterested. It would be as if to attract his attention somehow, to make him delve into the speech of the director, on which much now depends on his studies and being in that school, which was one of the most good and honorable. The scroll of the dead continued to hover at Yu Sheng's shoulder. The director still could not understand what kind of power is stored in this scroll of the dead and what is the meaning of the unknown drawing on it. He asked Yu Sheng this, but did not dare to ask again, noticing that the disciple looked detached and silent. Homeroom teacher Liu Qingfeng bent down to look exactly into Yu Sheng's eyes. He held him by the shoulder and was more gentle in communication than usual. The director talks to him and the student has to answer, but for some reason continues to be silent. The voice of the class teacher made Yu Sheng raise his head to ask again. Now he was torn out of his thoughts and was obliged to listen to the words, conclusions of the director with all attention. The director folded his hands in the lock, resting his chin on them, looked at Yu Sheng from under his brows and, having captured his attention, continued to reason in his head. After all, to get an egg with 9 whole patterns in rebirth is luck and happiness. Such a result is inherent only to the lucky ones, but in this case it is true and not fake. Under these conditions, Yu Sheng is still from the criminal city of Moj. The principal frowned and asked the student to honestly answer the question he would ask him now. Actually, the question looked very strange and not typical, but the director still asked what he wanted to ask and neither he nor anyone else expected such an answer. To the question that if Yu Sheng wakes up 6 or even 9 times one day, then what will he do with it? Yu Sheng replied confidently and loudly that under such conditions he would serve the people. Let him have treated these words with skepticism and pessimism in the classroom before. Now he was standing in front of the director's desk and only a complete fool would have answered in some other way. The fishing rod was thrown very successfully. The director was surprised that this guy from the criminal city of Moj has such good thoughts. With the next question, the man clarified what Yu Sheng had ever dreamed of doing before and the answer to this question surprised him again. But now it is not entirely clear in a good or bad sense. Yu Sheng replied as it was. Last night his father went to prostitutes and Yu Sheng personally denounced him. The director slapped his forehead, muttering something about you forgetting about it, while the assistant secretary tried to hide her laughter by covering her lips with her palm. She laughed both because of the strange answer to the question posed and how much the class teacher's jaw dropped down from shock. Yu Sheng was released. The director asked him to rest now and not tell anyone about his exam results, promised that he would figure out in the near future how and what to do with Yu's training. The student was already listening with his back, but he waved his hand anyway, thanked the director and said goodbye to him. All 3 of them who remained in the office were looking after him. The director was thinking again that this guy has such good inclinations, and he also somehow got out of the criminal city. Yu Sheng got home in the evening. The sky was already dark, but still without stars. I wanted to be in the apartment sooner. I wanted to come to my room and think about almost the past day. However, apparently it was not yet possible. A dripping blood trail on the handle of the front door accurately informed the owner of the house that he was not alone in it. The father hardly returned back. He was not able to escape from the prison cell in which he is now sitting. It was all sour. Someone else had obviously snuck into his house while Yu Sheng himself was not in it. Yu Shen's room was dark. There were crumpled things everywhere on the floor, notebooks. In the midst of a complete mess on the light-tiled floor were bright bloody footprints that led to a closet with clothes. I had to move very quietly, so that the illegal guest would not notice the appearance of the owner. The guest was a young guy. He might have been about 17. His clothes were old. There was a torn bullet hole between his shoulder blades. The whole orange t-shirt was stained with blood from other less dangerous wounds. Pink hair was shaggy, matted. It seemed that they were also stained with blood and it was unknown to whom this blood belonged, to the wounded or the attacker. The boy was rummaging through things. He wanted to find something. Clearly was not going to take valuables and rob the house. Anyone living knows that such a thing is strictly punishable by law, unless it happens in the dangerous and lawless city of Moj. It didn't work out completely crazy. The floorboards creaked, giving Yu Shen away. The pink-haired man had to react quickly. Someone came and could reveal him. He pulled his knife out of his belt and disappeared behind the wall. But before he could even blink, Yu appeared next to him with a dagger in his hand. Moving was not an option. Yu advised the stranger not to twitch once again. He put his weapon exactly to the aorta. Press a little harder and the wounded man will be overtaken by death. Yu Shen was terribly infuriated by washing the floors. He did not like this business, and now the whole floor was smeared with someone else's blood. He did not want to add dirt. The day was not the best. I wanted to lie down and think rather than run around with a mop as usual. The stranger looked scared. He raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture, explained that he only wanted to take the necessary medicines. He assured that he had not taken anything else, and had not injured anyone. Yu Sheng calmly pointed his finger to the side. There were several medicinal potions on the shelf in front. They would help the wounds that the stranger had well. This behavior was discouraged. The wounded man froze in place. Yu only now took a closer look at his weapon, realizing that it was his dagger. The wounded man assured the owner of the house that, in fact, he did not really need healing drugs anymore. He would do without them and would be fine. Yu Sheng asked why this guy doesn't take medicine, but he still took someone else's weapon. The only question that could be asked in the wounded man's position was to clarify whether Yu Sheng was going to resort to murder. It is forbidden to kill outside the criminal city of Moj. It is illegal. Yu, with all his desire, could not do it, however. The wounded man exhaled with relief, whispered something that he now owes Yu his life. In fact, he intends to repay the debt now and help with what Yu Shen has problems with. He had no problems that anyone other than Yu Shen himself would be able to solve. Although, if this guy says that he is ready to help in anything, then there is one suggestion. Yu squinted at the pink hair and asked the guy to kill himself right now so that it wouldn't cause problems and wouldn't interfere with the owner of the house himself. The request really scared everyone except Shen himself. It seemed to the stranger that the owner of the house had shorted out, otherwise it was impossible to explain the cold prudence, amazing calmness. An unknown person got into his house, shied around and rummaged through personal belongings. Besides, covered in blood and wounds, you never know what happened to him and who is following him. The stranger was a murderer. Even if he was not quite like him, he offered to kill anyone for free for the owner of the house, if he only knew that Yu Shen was capable of killing almost anyone on his own without anyone's help. However, you could not kill the intruder in his house now, so without a shadow of a doubt, he suggested that he kill himself again on his own. The stranger screamed in fright. He really didn't do anything. As it seemed to him, it was not clear what the hell this guy was doing with his life. Apparently, the fact that this youngster snuck into Yu Shen's house, messed up his room and stained the floor with his blood did not seem at all important, worthy of death. Actually, if they were in a criminal city right now, then this idiot would have lost his useless life on the threshold. This information completely changed the stranger's attitude to the situation. He mumbled in surprise that in the criminal city of Moga there is only one quota per year to justify a person, and the owner of the house is too young now. The possibility that he got out of such a miserable and dangerous place on his own was literally unreal and impossible. Yu Shen did not hurry to remove his dagger from the stranger's neck. Besides, this guy was too talkative, constantly talking nonsense and nonsense. Even he understood and admitted it himself. I had to caustically shut him up. The stranger wanted to scream already, maybe even wished himself a speedy death, because this eccentric did not kill him himself, but did not let him go anywhere. It was not at all clear what he was going to do and take further, only poked his dagger into the aorta. There was nothing to do. The wounded stranger asked you to start and closed his eyes, shrinking. He repeated to himself over and over again that he was saying goodbye to this not entirely successful life and swears that he wants to become a first-class killer capable of anything in the next life. Death still did not overtake the loser's killer. He was alive and well, breathing and moving. There were no new bloodstains on his t-shirt and there were no more holes of wounds in his body. Yu was not going to kill him with his own hands. He even repeated it for the third or fourth time. While they are outside the criminal city of Moj, no one can commit murder in any way. It is punishable by law, and that is what is written in the legislation. The stranger in a moment scrolled these words in his head, quickly thought it over and analyzed how the result may have found a loophole that saves his life completely. This weirdo kept repeating this is illegal, that is illegal, and he was going to not let the wounded man go anywhere. In general, it is also illegal to hold someone against his will. For this, the criminal code of the Moj provides for punishment in the form of 3 years of imprisonment, and with the seriousness of the crime committed and aggravating conditions, the term of imprisonment can reach from 5 to 8 years of imprisonment. The circulation about the laws of the criminal code, which Yu Shen himself read from cover to cover, he listened in silence, but then asked how old this smart guy was. It turns out that he was not mistaken before when he decided that he was definitely about 17 and no more. Everything was right. Of course Yu Shen had no right to keep this person in his house now and he should have been released. So he did. He removed the dagger from someone else's neck, sheathed it in the waistband of his jacket, and pushed it into the shoulder so that the smart guy would fall out onto the terrace from where he could leave. This boy hadn't even woken up yet. He was already some kind of murderer and even boasted that he could kill anyone for free to fulfill his duty. He didn't seem stupid if he remembered the criminal code, but for some reason he stuttered and asked if he was really being released and waited for Yu Shen to turn his back on him. He immediately took off. He was glad to finally get away from this strange man and be free. even smiled as he ran towards the street where it was already quite dark and night had begun. But he did not expect that he would be grabbed by the scruff of the neck and dragged back for some unknown reasons. Time seemed to have passed a little, considering that it took a lot of time for the stranger to get into the house, find what he was looking for and, moreover, heal his wounds with the medicines, healing potions, ointments, and bandages found. The wound was serious. The gunshot could have simply killed him if he had not had such strength and endurance. They didn't talk to this eccentric owner of the house for a long time, because of the possibility of death that day. A sharp dagger on the neck, which would easily open the aorta, releasing blood. Now he was almost out. He was already on the street joyful, and as luck would have it, something else stupid came to mind of this Yu Shen. Hitting his back hard on the threshold of the house, the stranger flew into him like a bullet. He didn't even have time to understand when Yu turned back and ran to catch up. Not a single sound was heard behind him. It seemed that he was really free and no longer had any business with this person. After not a long movement, the wounded stranger could only shout a couple of insults and found himself in an already hated room with the door closed. Yu Sheng casually pushed the stranger to the floor. It came out too quickly. This guy's patience was obviously not infinite. He was shouting and pointing at Yu, trying to figure out what was on his mind at all. It seemed that Yu Shen's brain was working non-stop. One by one clever plans were being developed there, such that the situation would benefit Shen in any case and be solved the way he wanted it. The wounded man left the room freely. The owner of this room did not restrict his precious freedom in any way. All this was not illegal detention or even detention against someone's will. The stranger was sitting on the floor silently examining the face of the owner of the house. He could not find any more words to argue or swear with this guy. His actions and decisions were too thoughtful and logical, so much so that they even skillfully turned the plan to escape the stranger against him. Yu Sheng decided not to wait for an answer to his words. He knew that he was right and understood that his strategy was working flawlessly again, which meant that it was possible to continue following the plan to find out what he wanted to find out. He turned away from the guy who was frozen at the bottom. He had serious injuries that already looked like torn cuts, not bullet holes. It was contraindicated for the stranger to move now. It was necessary to clean and bandage the wounds. Yu walked away for just a second, and the stranger continued to sit on the floor with a thoughtful and surprised look. The guy still looked scared, but everything was going according to plan. Throwing a white bar of mala and a brush in his direction, Yu said that he needed to wipe off his blood, and if he didn't, he would have to threaten with new wounds. Yu himself went back to the bedside table to find the necessary medicines there. He did not expect that they would listen to him. Out of the corner of his eye he noticed that the wounded man was really frowning hard and washing blood stains with soap. This surprised Yu Sheng, but not very much. Rummaging in the drawer a little more, he took out a bottle of pills that could help. Yu Sheng gave them to the wounded man and waited for him to thank him, explaining that he had forgotten to say about the expired medicine. The wounded man immediately broke out again, starting a quarrel and shouting. Then Yu Shen confirmed his guesses that energy is born from negative emotions, which are still tedious in some way to cause. Hurrying to calm the raging guest, Yu Sheng labeled his words as a joke and warned that he should start treatment right now. Otherwise he would die of blood loss in exactly 32 minutes. It didn't look like this guy was really some kind of assassin, mercenary, or anything like that. The dressing was slow and problematic. There was a feeling that he was not familiar with these things at all. He would not be able to kill someone. The guy started shouting at this again. He claimed that he missed only once and he needed time to train, gain experience, and gain hands. He introduced himself as Lai Han, who one day will definitely become the best, first-class serial killer. He muttered something else about how nothing could be done on the first try, that he would make a good serial killer. But when he noticed the completely bored look of the interlocutor, he turned away. Obviously, this Yu Sheng didn't understand him or his problems. Yu Sheng actually understood a lot about this matter, but he did not expect such an attitude and stupidity. To become a killer, you need to devote your life and all of yourself to this. Yu Sheng thought so, and he understood that it was worth a lot, but did this Lai Han understand the high price? This guy shouts that he is not afraid of death at all. He only wants it to come to him as a killer, and he was allowed to die a noble death. These thoughts for Yu Sheng were also stupid and meaningless. If he's talking about the nobility of killers, which by the way is sharply different from the usual definition of the word nobility, then why didn't he kill him when he saw it? He could kill the owner of the house who came, hide his body, take what he needed and get out of someone else's house, calmly leave, and not face what he faced. It turned out that this loser killer even has his own personal professional principles. As an example, he gave probably the most basic of them. Provided that he was paid, he would help this person. Murders that he has never committed before are for him a job, not a hobby. No one hired him. No one ordered the murder of the owner of the house, so Lai Han is not going to kill him. The tirade about heroism and that fake noble had to be rudely interrupted. Yu Shen perfectly understood the politics of this guy's reasoning, and it was clear that everything he was talking about was dust in his eyes. In fact, he is simply not capable of killing someone. Yu Sheng even thought for a second that this man was really a killer, but even the killer had not awakened in him yet, so what could there be to talk about? No one will even hire him. During their conversation, which consisted entirely of Lai Han's speeches, the dressing was already over. The redhead was sitting in a t-shirt and looked clearly better. The blood loss was stopped. He threw in the wake of Yu Shen, who was already leaving the room, that he had reached his majority only half a month ago, and was going to attend the awakening ceremony soon. That's the only reason he dared to lie about his age and eventually received an order. Yu Sheng stopped, but listened to the story without turning around. Everything looked simple at first glance. Track down the ordered person, find a more suitable place and kill. Lai Han did not change clothes, did not try to hide much. He tied some dark cloth over his face, took a single knife with him. I wandered around for a long time, but eventually I was able to pin down this awakened one. However, he did not manage to strike a single blow. A teaspoon was stuck in his chest. It went almost through the whole body and was only just awakened. Lai Han did not suspect in any way, could not think that there would be such a tangible difference in strength and capabilities between an awakened person and a non-awakened person, even if he just woke up the spoon as if at the click of a finger. That's it. Yu Sheng started walking towards the door again. He felt someone else's gaze on his back, but he also did not turn around. He asked Lai Han to be treated thoroughly using the medications that were given to him, and then wipe off his blood from the floor, which was everywhere in general. It would not be bad if this hand helped and took out the garbage, the package with which lies at the front door. Having done all this, he can safely roll away from someone else's house and do his killer business away. Lai Han still couldn't quite believe that he was being released. He expected many outcomes, but not this one. Yu Sheng repeated once again that when he finished doing everything he was asked to do, he could be free. But in another case he would owe his life. In this case, Yu Sheng will find him after a while, so it's better for him to survive. Having already opened the door and stepped out of the threshold, Yu Sheng pressed his lips, repeating that not all awakened are strong. That was the end of their conversation. The door slammed and Lai Han was left alone in the room. One day, as much as 100 years ago, the terrifying forces of Kai resurrected. Kai threatened the entire kingdom of people, when a ferocious and bloodthirsty evil spirits rebelled after coming to this world. Gorillas with toothy eyes on their bellies, mutating pterodactyls, and many more unimaginable creatures appeared in the ominous fog. Each of these monsters, without exception, was configured and programmed for the complete extermination of the human race in order to dominate the human kingdom. It was completely unexpected that there were people in the human kingdom who were able to resist this hassle. To everyone's happiness, people appeared among the world in whom an extraordinary power awakened, which made them much stronger, more resilient, more talented, and gave them the ability to kill evil spirits from another world in the kingdom. The first of the awakened fought hard against the evil that came into their world. Later, sacrificing their lives and strength, they founded 4 powerful outposts to protect their kingdom of people from the hassle and crowds of monsters. The outpost of the pacification of evil spirits, the outpost of dawn, the outpost of the dome, and the outpost of demons. Since then, 4 outposts have always stopped evil spirits, and human masters stand guard over them without missing evil. The day turned out to be bright and warm, even calm in a sense. There were few people on the streets. Yu Shen was crossing a pedestrian crossing with his hands in his jacket pockets when he met a group of 3 guys who were discussing something violently. The news of the day was that the laudatory outpost of the pacification of evil spirits could not resist. In the Xinhai area this afternoon, it is not known where the monsters came from. The largest and most dangerous of them was something like a centaur. The newsline said that Class B monsters were walking around in Xinhai, and their victims were counted by the hundreds. Nowhere was it said what would happen next, what measures were being taken to protect citizens of neighboring districts. No one knew what the Ministry of Exorcism was doing at all, either. It was restless around now, and no one could imagine if it would be like this for some time. Obviously, that's why the street was deserted and quiet. Yu Sheng continued to go about his business. He did not listen to the conversations of those guys, but they shouted so loudly that it was difficult not to make out the topic of discussion. Soon he turned the corner and completely disappeared from sight. Here in the alley it was even quieter and empty. Besides, the sun did not blind his eyes. Yu Shen could not get lost in such a place either. He knew this path too well, because he had walked along it not once. When he came out to a small stall that stood in the shade, he stopped sighing. He finally got where he needed to go. There was a wooden chaise longue at the entrance, there was a laptop and a mug of something bright on the coffee table next to it. Probably the stall owner was going to come back here, but he hasn't come yet. There were no customers in the store, only refrigerators buzzed, polyethylene beverage packages cracked. Everything looked abandoned, unfinished. At the table that served as a cash register sat a heavy man in a sweaty t-shirt. He had a shaggy beard, and his head shone bald. A reddening scar twitched from his forehead to his cheek. He knew Yu Shen and waited. Without greeting him, he put a paper bag with a seal on the counter, indicated that the goods were in it. Yu took the parcel, pressing it to his stomach, looked at the shopkeeper, who began to approach him leaning on the table. The man menacingly and angrily said that this time was the last and now they are completely even. Thoroughly do not owe anything to each other or to themselves. Ugiknav Yu Shen was already at the exit of the stall. He threw his hand up without turning around and said goodbye. The man turned his head, which made it noticeable that the scar goes all the way to the top of his head, apparently. That's why there was no hair left on his head. After waiting for Yu Shen to disappear around the corner, the man got up and walked towards the exit. He muttered to himself, remembering the last words of the guy that they would see each other. The man knew that they would not see each other soon. At least in the near future they would not see each other at all. The stall owner was lying at the table, resting his pierced head on the leg of the chaise longue. He looked exactly the same as the one who was talking to Yu Shen, but the difference was that this one was the real owner of the stall, and the second one was the killer of this owner, and the one who skillfully took his appearance on himself. Yu Shen got home safely, without incident. It was already noon, and the streets were still deserted and quiet. Obviously, the news that the monsters had made their way to people too quickly scared everyone. Deciding not to postpone important things for later, he unpacked the parcel that he picked up at the stall. A red stone, a demonic crystal flickered between his fingers, the quintessence that evil spirits create every time after absorbing vital human forces. Now that Yu Shen had the stone in his hands, it was time for him to do what he needed to do. Choosing the largest place on the floor in the living room, he removed all the furniture to the wall so that it would not interfere. The first crossbow was aimed with an arrow at the door, and was tied with a red thread to the handle. The thread went further and got tangled in Yu Shen's hands. The rest of the crossbows stood nearby. Their arrows were directed in different directions. One also looked at the door, the second at the ceiling, the third at the wall. Red threads stretched from each of them and remained in Yu Shen's tenacious grip. Now everything was perfect. Yu Shen sat down on the floor without letting go of the threads, trying to concentrate. An arc of scarlet color flashed from behind his back. 2 demonic crystals lit up in front of his face, and then a third joined them. Meanwhile, at the outpost of the pacification of evil spirits, along the perimeter of the mountains, a road leading down was built. Around it was entwined with barbed wire and dry trees with gnarled branches. 3 people covered with burgundy robes calmly went down. Suddenly, a loud voice came from somewhere above. The elder who was sitting on the ledge of the mountain did not look at them, but his voice seemed to be everywhere. The guy leading the procession slightly threw back his hood and smiled, folding his palms together. He tried to look as pleasant as possible and said that they needed a passage. The elder was clearly angry at such insistence. He repeated again, but more menacingly, that this road was closed to everyone, and if these ignorant insolents wanted to insist, they would invariably die. Immediately, the elder was surrounded by colored flashes of strong magic, and a dark whirlpool of emptiness and chaos opened above the heads of those walking, which would take them to itself in a second, thereby saving their lives. The men raised their hands here. He was just joking. His divine instruction has been serving the people for a long time, sacrificing a lot of things invariably. Each of them wouldn't dare to challenge. They would just leave right now so as not to anger the elder even more. For some reason, this guy finally smiled about the wine, asking if the old man had any advice for him. There was some advice. The instruction from the elder magician who guarded this passage was a lot of talking. When this trinity returns, it will have to tell its divine throne with one voice, advise it to change its name. These people should be called unclean instruction. It will be ideal for such scum. Everyone from this gathering does not care about people at all. They do not protect any of them. They care about their well-being. If it wasn't necessary for the old magician to protect this place day and night, a place where it is not appropriate to use force, then the whole trio would have already been killed by a pack. After listening to the instructions, which were not important to anyone there, and not needed, the chief in Troitsk thanked the old man, promised to convey his words to the one who needed them, and they turned around, marched back in their maroon formation. The old man frowned as he watched them go, but quickly returned to meditation, continuing to bathe in flashes of magic. Exactly 1 week has passed since the day Yu Sheng took the demonic crystal. The mobile phone was lying next to the burnt fragments of stone. They were charred and still continued to smoke. I had to answer the call, and for this I had to distract myself from meditation. During all this time, Yu Sheng never moved. The energy supply was enough. When the beeping of the phone became louder, the last pebble finally burned down, turning into a coal, and Yu Shen opened his eyes. It was Lai Qingfeng, his homeroom teacher, who called him. Listening to the teacher's voice, Yu loosened the threads tied to the crossbows and put everything in its place. Tomorrow morning he had to go back to school. It turned out that an important person from the Ministry of Exorcism was going there. The event is not an ordinary one. The presence is mandatory. It is planned to conduct a new certification, which was prepared specifically for some students. For those who were not weak and deserved such a level, they also wanted to appropriately and intelligently allocate resources. Yu Sheng remained silent. The class teacher did not ask if his ward student wanted to participate in this event at all. Lai Qingfeng considered this certification too important. The event carried a significant contribution, many opportunities, and trampled a successful path. Only one will pass, and even if Yu Shen is not the only one, it's still worth a try. Yu Shen wasn't going to refuse the offer, but he didn't say it directly either. In any case, he will follow his plans and be on his mind. It turned out that Lai Qingfeng was trying to contact Yu Sheng's father. The homeroom teacher said that for some reason he could not get through to adults. Yu Sheng doubted that phones were allowed in prison. An image of his father popped up in his head by himself, pulling the bars all in snot and tears, with requests to let him out. The homeroom teacher seemed to have just remembered that the boy had handed over his father to the police because of a meeting with prostitutes. Yu Sheng went to the calendar and no longer listened to Lai Qingfeng. The guy just dropped the call, realizing that everything necessary had been said. He looked at the calendar carefully, noted to himself that there were 312 days left. The next day, Yu Sheng was sitting at the last desk again, propping his cheek with his hand and looking out the window. Other students were swarming around. They were violently discussing the upcoming certification. They said different things, but the meaning was the same everywhere. Everyone wanted to be elected, regardless of what responsibility this imposes on a person and what difficulties can be expected on this supposedly gilded path. The young students who had recently passed the awakening ceremony with good and bad results wanted to be chosen. The best, those who would drive away monsters alone. Not to kill, but to drive away. This perception of the situation could only make you laugh, so Yu Sheng did not listen to anyone for a long time. A teacher entered the classroom. He loudly and imperiously asked for silence. The students themselves also began to whisper that it was time to end the conversations. Everyone looked at the homeroom teacher with adoration and anticipation. Just a few minutes ago, a special notification came and the situation, although not much, has changed. The homeroom teacher looked unperturbed and calm. This time, not only people close to the Ministry of Exorcism came from Xingli, but also officers in the reserve of the Ministry of Security. In addition, the certification format was somewhat changed and now deviated from what it was usually. Each of the schools will exhibit 5 students, who will be screened out by specialists, people from the Ministry of Exorcism and people from the Ministry of Security. Even this did not change the stable attitude of the students to the event. It seems that they did not care at all about the seriousness and the rest that followed. They wanted to shine their faces among the lucky ones, to be different, to boast of their selectivity, even if they were eliminated for weakness and unfitness. The principal chooses the students, and from this class he chose only Yu Shen. All at once began to protest this election. The teachings shouted that it was not reasonable, not fair, and not fair to choose such a weakling as the quiet Yu Shen instead of candidates who, in their own opinion, are worthy of laurels. To calm everyone down, Lai Qingfeng had to raise his voice and slam loudly on the teacher's chair. Sometimes people's narrow-mindedness was amazing, but Lai Qingfeng had his own advice like this. It doesn't matter if they disagree with the director's decision or consider it not honest. Everyone needs to remember that this life does not know such a word as justice. If a person has been treated unfairly, then there is no point in complaining about it. On the contrary, you need to accept it and start improving yourself so that you can eventually break this injustice yourself, and it is pointless to shout about it. The students immediately fell silent, staring at their desks. Lai Qingfeng asked Yu Sheng to come to the director's office right now because he wants to talk to him. The director's office was bright and clean as usual. He was sitting in his place, and his assistant stood like a statue at his shoulder and was silent. The very first thing the principal said when Yu Sheng entered the office with his homeroom teacher was that the guy looked cheerful. The second he decided to ask how his father was doing. One would think that the director immediately realized that Yu Shen's answers would never be simple. Machinations in the criminal city of Moj are expensive. It was not clear whether what was said referred to the situation with Yu Shen's father or the situation with the certification. The certification that absolutely everyone is talking about and thinking about now actually checks not only the students, it also checks the school from which this student is represented. The city of Mobai is very small. There are 3 schools there that are not famous from the word at all. For this reason, the management plans to combine them into one institution. Who will become the new director of this school also depends entirely on the results of the certification. It affects almost all aspects. Obviously, everyone will benefit, but that's not what the director was going to ask for. He asked Yu Sheng not to give in to all this for anything. It is not clear that Yu Shen asked if he claimed, but he answered this with one word. Price, the crime city of Moj. Yu Sheng was born there, grew up, survived. Nothing will change the fact that Yu Shen is a native of this place, at the mention of which everyone usually twitches and gets goosebumps. The question of the price put everyone present in the director's office into a stupor. There was an awkward silence. According to the rules of the criminal city of Moj, if someone asks a person for something, he is obliged to pay for the fulfillment of this request. Yu Sheng was not going to do anything for free. He would not even lift a finger because he did not consider it completely his problem and goal. The director, without opening his fingers, tried to seem lucky, was going to defend his proposal. Yu Shen will get to the exam. This is already something out of the ordinary for him and it seems a worthy payment. Yu Shen's participation in this event will be beneficial to each of them. As Shen understood, the director needs him to take up this case, and the exam is just a ticket that someone has to finance. Nothing else could be taken out of this situation. Even if the director tried to change his request, Yu Sheng was too understanding. The guy put his finger up, consider it a fee, and in the criminal city of Moj, about which no one has any idea. People who do not follow the rules always die quickly. The director let go of his hands, knocking them on his desk. He is unable to somehow control this and set more of his conditions in this matter. It remains only to agree to the student's conditions, which in itself is no longer correct. Under the guise of a board, the director offered 3 crystals of the first level. Yu Shen immediately agreed to this option of the board and, already turning around, decided to clarify whether it would be necessary to kill someone. Yu Shen is wild in his behavior for many, cold in his thoughts and words, but people will never be able to understand him. He holds himself like a mercenary, like the one who came here from Moj, as he used to tear his claws while. The director even jumped off his chair after what he heard. He raised his hand asking not to kill anyone. There would be no need for that. Yu Sheng noticed that it is forbidden to kill people outside the criminal city of Moj. 3 soul stones are not enough. As always, he listened only to the essence itself and considered the rest of the comments unnecessary. The director continued talking to his back. Yu Shen will need to rest on the school bus on the way, and he may not think about other students. The most important thing is not to resort to killing anyone. Agreeing again with a quiet cry, Yu Sheng left the director's office, putting his hands in his jacket pockets. The bus was empty. Yu Shen was one of the first to arrive, but he could not rest, as Director Shen himself advised. Literally immediately, 3 students approached him, whom he did not know before. Apparently they were representatives of one of the other 2 schools. The first one was called Zhao Zicheng. He was dressed neatly and looked like a very ordinary golden disciple 9B. Next to him was a girl named Yang Ruoxin and a guy named Lai Kai. Shen also had to introduce himself, but he did it without much enthusiasm. Zhao Zicheng sat down next to Yu Sheng without asking, starting a conversation. This time, the mayor of the city of Moj will be secretly present at the certification. Mobai is a very small city. Its representatives are very weak and cannot brag about their achievements very much. Moj doesn't have as much strength as before. Premier Sun is also the mayor of Moj. It turns out a very important and fat set of political personalities who believe that a lot of capable and strong talents come out of there. Everyone knows that earlier Mobai also had master defenders who were highly valued. These people provided the most important resources, then stubbornly brought up a new generation. The master defenders were leaving, and the natives of the new generation became excellent defenders. Zhao Zicheng believed that the decision to join the modes would make a person famous. It is not even so important who will eventually be chosen for certification. Absolutely everyone will follow the exam. It turned out that all this was a unique opportunity to become successful, and in demand as quickly as possible. Let other schools also have a lot of masters. It seems they choose one, and put the other 3 people to help the first one, so it will be more convenient and easier for him to have more chances. Yu Sheng quickly understood what this guy was talking about, but he continued to remain silent and listen, not seeing anything useful in all this for himself, until Zhao Zicheng mentioned the difficulty of winning. His retinue Yang Ruozhen and Lai Kai did not begin to agitate the success of their friend, although then it seemed that they were agitating Yu Shen himself more. It turned out that this guy was the headman, which was not very surprising. Elder Zhao's father is the head of the Mobai Security Department. Elder Zhao was chosen for certification. Just one word from Yu Sheng and he will be able to count on the 3 of them. There was too much goodwill, faith and fanaticism in the eyes of the retinue. Zhao Zicheng himself only picturesquely threw off his bangs, saying that whatever it was necessary, the prospects with him would be simply brilliant. Yu Sheng interpreted all the information he received in his own way, decided to ask again if Zhao Zicheng's father was the head of the security department and mentioned that his father was now in prison. Zhao Zicheng offered his help. If the father did not violate anything serious, then Zhao Zicheng can only say, and he will already be released. Yu Sheng shook his head trying to interrupt the next chirping of this elder. He does not need to reduce his father's sentence or even let him go free. He wonders if this guy can increase the amount of time that his father was given. Yu Sheng's request clearly upset Zhao Zicheng. Obviously his moral principles did not accept such an attitude towards his father, but this was the calculation. Yu Sheng immediately realized that the personality of the headman is exclusively based on idealism, which means it should be easy to cause negative emotions in him. Zhao Zicheng turned away in the other direction so as not to look at the interlocutor. It was not clear to him how much this guy must feel a lot of hatred for his father if he asks for such a thing. Any child would be glad that his father would get out of prison faster than the time he was supposed to serve. But to ask the son of a high-ranking person to detain his father in prison, also with such calmness as if this is normal. It was not possible to understand this. Watching the face that showed only contempt and discontent, Yu Sheng pursed his lips. For some reason, the gray energy did not appear and did not come from the headman Zhao Zicheng. It would be foolish to allow the possibility that Yu Sheng simply caused it incorrectly. But even he himself wondered if this time he could have made some kind of mistake. Shen turned back to the window, and Zhao Zicheng, who was still sitting in the next seat, suddenly seemed to come to life. While talking, he did not even notice how they crossed the city line, now moving away from him. Rising from his seat, Zhao Zicheng headed closer to the driver's booth. In his understanding, it was too strange to conduct the certification far away or not in the city. The driver may have made a mistake on the road at all. What happened a week ago in the Xinhai area is still being talked about. Because of the incident with monsters outside the city, it is now very unsafe. There was no mistake in the driver's route. The man in uniform, without distracting himself from the road, said that the place of certification was temporarily changed. Now it will take place not too far outside the city in the old factory. There is a lot of space there. There is a place to roam and it is much more convenient to conduct certification than in the same city. In addition, everyone should calm down. People from Moj are traveling with them, and this is a serious reason to think that there are no dangers threatening them around, and there will not be. Zhao Zicheng held up his finger in agreement with the driver's words. He quickly believed him and asked him to shout when the bus arrived at its destination, while the others slept. The sneaky grin and laughter in his voice were obviously noticed only by Yu Shen himself. 3 identical school buses stopped in a vacant lot. Pipes stuck out from under the sandy ground. A small building greeted the arrivals with silence and fences. Everyone gradually went out into the street, immediately starting to stretch their stiff limbs. Yu Sheng was in his thoughts again while Zhao Zicheng was looming somewhere nearby with his friends. Yu Shen did not share the headman's optimism. To be more precise, he did not care at all about the guy's joy that everything happened exactly as the driver told him. Out of the corner of his eye, Yu Sheng noticed that the homeroom teacher had also gone. He was probably on the bus of another school now. Lai Qingfeng was trying to gather the scattered wards of students into one pile. Yu Sheng wasn't going to stay in the crowd for a while longer. He had his own plans for that day. When he began to moving away from the fellow traveler, the headman Zhao Zicheng shouted again, pointing his finger at the untidy, shaggy guy. Du Sui also came to this certification. The same talent of the 6 patterns that was always on the ear. Lai Kai, who was standing next to him, even doubted for a minute whether this person was exactly the same Du Sui. The guy stood on the sidelines and smiled. He literally sparkled with the aura of the best, even if you can't say that about him. After all, a complete mess on his head, crooked, overgrown sideburns and beard did not create a stellar image. Simple and not flashy clothes, too. Zhao Zicheng noticed that Yu Sheng was leaving and called out to him. Let none of them agree on anything with each other, but the headman Zhao Zicheng hoped very much that Shen would not take it into his head to mess with Du Sui. This person should be shunned. He is extremely strong compared to all of them. Without changing his habits, Yu Sheng only threw a lazy aha at these words, continuing to walk in his own direction. Zhao Zicheng actually hoped very much that this Yu Sheng would not lose their second. The elder Zhao Zicheng also said this, but in the end he did not receive any answer. The driver of the bus in which the headman and his entourage and Yu Sheng were traveling patiently waited for the moment when all the students who arrived would move away towards the entrance. At this time, he was slowly lighting a cigarette, lowering the visor of his cap over his eyes. He trampled an unfinished cigarette in the sand and went back to dialing someone's phone number. The school bus driver, or rather the one who played his role perfectly, entered the office. The room was almost completely dark. Only a lot of screens were lit, on which there were pictures from CCTV cameras. Cameras were crammed absolutely everywhere. Here in this place to remain completely unnoticed and unattended is something impossible. A man in a suit was sitting at the table. He looked very bored, even a little sleepy. He waited a long time for the bus driver to return to discuss the children who were brought to the certification. He turned around when the front door quietly closed, asked how it all went, how well and what could be highlighted. The driver's response was not entirely positive. He collapsed wearily into a chair next to him, pulled off his annoying cap. Judging by the imposing pose in which he sat and by the expensive leather shoes, this man is not the least important person in this student certification event. The new generation arriving in this place is literally useless. The level of development of vigilance and thinking, which are directly capable of saving their lives, is at 0. They are so naive that they will believe any word of a person who successfully shows himself on the good side, disposes to trust. Such personalities are too easy to manipulate. Besides, they did not even ask why they were being taken to a factory outside the city. If a person of high position tells them some stupid tall tale, then they will undoubtedly fall for it and will not ask unnecessary questions. The students who arrived from a remote town with a self-government policy, one could not expect more from any of them, is an ideal case and circumstances for those plans that have already been built for this certification. But the driver approached the screen and asked to stop recording at a certain moment. There was Yu Sheng who was calmly walking on his own mind. This guy could be very interesting to them. This time, Lai Qingfeng became the team leader, which was not so bad, and explained his arrival for the certification along with the rest of the wards or students. Having gathered all the participants of the event in front of him, Lai Qingfeng informed them that the topics for certification were not yet known. It was necessary to wait for the arrival of people from the Ministry of Exorcism. Then it would become more clear. Lai Qingfeng decided to tell them directly that this was indeed a unique opportunity for all of them to become selected students for certification. Everyone should have realized right now that everyone should be extremely careful and act exclusively on a sober head. Only in such conditions will they have a visible chance of success. Lai Qingfeng looked around the rows as a disciple and stopped at Yu Shen, who was standing in front as usual with a cold face. He was wondering if this boy could surprise him again, surprise the others and make his way even further. Lai Qingfeng's thoughts were interrupted by a noise. An SUV appeared from the side of the road. The car literally jumped over one bump after another. The driver was clearly not afraid to crash. Turning around in a semicircle, the car stopped next to the students. A tall, beefy man with a cigarette in his teeth came out. He walked confidently, even impressively, but he looked like quite a good person. Without hesitation, he approached the class teacher and tightly put his hands on his shoulders. They were well acquainted, but the fact that Lai Qingfeng became a teacher surprised the stranger so much that he almost dropped his cigarette. He turned towards the students with a smirk. They were all almost shaking with fear. No one could understand yet whether this man came from the Ministry of Exorcism or from the Moj, but almost everyone understood that this man looked terribly dangerous when he looked at the headman. That is, even his legs gave way. Yu Sheng continued to stand still and did not share the fright. The man, continuing to smoke, approached Shen. He looked at him without evaluation, but with interest. Is this guy not afraid of him? Yu Sheng really wasn't afraid of him. He didn't understand what exactly was fashionable to be afraid of in him. It was Luo Tian. He came as a representative of the Ministry of Exorcism, geographically in Jianbei Province. He is the captain of the 3rd Squad and belongs to the 5th generation of the Awakened. He did not consider it necessary to tell the rest. He had no achievements worth mentioning. Now it was necessary to think about the topic of the upcoming certification, which all the students wanted to learn faster. Luo Tian scratched his chin, choosing something better. The option that he decided to offer everyone was very surprised. Luo Tian decided to arrange a fight among the guys. Everything was extremely simple and clearly thought up. The one who wins the fight stays, the one who loses the fight leaves. Some even gasped in shock, and Lai Qingfeng only smiled, noticing that his friend Luo Tian had not changed at all and remained the same.